Ahoy and welcome aboard the Tidal Fox. I'll be your captain today. You can call me Tide. This is the first deck profile I'm doing for the channel. So I'm going to start with a deck that is near and dear to me, Pirates. Now I have several pirate decks, but this one was the first one I ever created and it is in its current form. I am currently using the newest pirate commander, Admiral Unsinkable. But when I originally started out about 7 years ago, I was using Admiral Beckett Brass of the Ixalan set. It was a greedy and selfish deck about stealing your stuff and making it mine, but this one's greedy and selfish in a whole other way. So first we're going to start off with just the whole deck idea. This deck idea is based solely around Brass's ability of milling 4 cards out of my deck and beginning a combat on my turn, returning a pirate-type creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. It gets base power and toughness 4/4, and it gains haste to the end of turn. Now, finality counter, for those who don't know or are new to the set, haven't experienced these yet, or you just don't have one in your playgroup using it, is a counter that says if this creature with this finality counter would die, it is exiled instead. So she can pull things from the graveyard, but only once, as long as it has the finality counter. And that honestly doesn't really come into play that often. I have some ways to deal with finality counters, there's plenty of them, but unless you're running against a deck that's just going to keep things off your board or not let you have things on your board, the creature's going to stay there. You know, unless you're running against like a mono black murder deck. It's going to stay there. White's removal, it's going to exile it. So the idea is that have cards in my graveyard and pull them out. Now, if we look at my distribution of the deck, there's 99 cards in the deck, because this is Commander. We have almost a third of it being lands, which is a little low. People tend to agree 34 to 36 is where you want lands, and I currently have 32 here, but one of my other cards does transform into a land. So technically, I would call that 33. I have some basic mana rocks, and I have some treasure token generation, because we are pirates. So I do have the mana to make it, but I sometimes do struggle a little, but adding 2 more land wouldn't fix that as much as more consistently getting out the things that help me with my land problems. So a third of it's lands, and then about another 33 or so is my sorceries, artifacts, and enchantments. That's going to total up to about 33. Yeah, that's about a third. I'm really heavy on the sorceries out of this block. I'm not really playing so much on my opponent's turn as I am on my turn. It's a very selfish solitaire style deck. Even though classic win condition is to create a board, stack damage, win the game. But it's not going to be through commander damage, because I am not Voltroning my commander. I'm not buffing her in any way. She makes my other weaker pirates stronger to 4/4, whereas the previous Admiral gave them a 1/1, which both is good. Both is great. My enchantments are very small. They are focused on what I am doing with here, because I don't have any specific enchantment searches. I have just general black tutors, and I have mystic tutors to search out for instants and sorceries. I'm only running 9 instants, and they're mostly protection cards, or just a quick way to get to where I want to, but we'll go over those at a later point in the video. The largest block that isn't lands is my creatures, because I am going to be putting cards in my graveyard. And if I put cards in my graveyard to pull out, if I can only pull out creatures, I want a majority of the deck to be creatures, and I want a majority of those creatures to be pirates. Now you're thinking, isn't this going to be a typal deck? Don't you want to be all pirates? And I do. But this deck is less piratey than my previous pirate decks, as this is the full Ixalan coalition. This is Admiral Brass's dream of unity within the plane, and that's what I designed this deck off of. Mostly because of a specific card that I really liked and I really enjoyed, so I tried to fit it in the deck as much as I could. But alright, we've gone over how we want to use the deck, how we want it to be, the ratios we have, and how that is going to work in the deck. So now we're going to explain why these ratios can work. We're going to go over the cards in the deck and why I've chosen these. So first, we're going to start with the lands. We're going to go through this. This seems like the simplest place to start. So 4 island, 4 mountain, 4 swamp. These basic lands are great. You need them. They are limited in my deck. 12. It's about a third, a little more than a third of what my lands are. But they are the color I need, and I need to be able to search for some basics. But that's less important. I just want to make sure I have my colors. So we're just going to go down the list alphabetically from here. We have Blood Crypt. It's a shock land, great shock land, gives me my colors. I can pay it tapped or I can play it immediately. Bojuka's Bog. Now, I always love this card. You never want your opponents to be able to access their grave as a resource or as a hand, even if they're not using it. But since Ixalan came out, even before then, but really with the Caverns of Ixalan, Graveyard just got ramped up, which is why I built this Ixalan Graveyard deck. So I have my own Bojuka's Bog to counter anyone else who wants to be doing the same idea as me. Cavern of Souls. We are essentially a typal deck. The more protection you can get to summon your creatures, as we are a creature-based typal deck, the better. This is just self-explanatory. Any typal deck should run this. Command Tower. We're running a 3-color deck. You need a command tower. Now, Mines of Moria. This one came out in the Lord of the Rings set, and I loved this for my treasure token deck, which will be a later video. But with the amount of legendaries I have in these pirates and the amount of graveyard I will have as we go through the deck, exiling 3 non-targetable cards like a land or a sorcery for my graveyard to make 2 treasure tokens to set those up for whenever I need them on a slow churn, that's really helpful, and otherwise, just a nice mountain. Up next, we have Nephalia Drownyard. Again, this deck's idea is to mill myself. So anything that says target player can mill 3, not target opponent mills 3, that's always a good addition to the deck, and that is why I put this in here, so I can mill myself 3. Because while it costs 3 mana to mill, Admiral doesn't use mana to bring them back out. It's a free drag out from my graveyard, and it buffs them up, and it gives them haste. So 3 mana to mill, I don't worry about how I spend my mana during my turns. My cards are generally coming out through other effects to cheat them out of the graveyard. Nesting Grounds. Now this one is a specific card that I have in here specific to Admiral Brass's ability. Now right down here where it says finality counters, those are dangerous if your opponent has some removal, like a green-red fight deck. This allows you to move counters from any permanent you control to another permanent. If you want to shuffle flying counters, you want to shuffle menace counters, loyalty counters, 1/1 counters, or you take your finality counter and give it to your opponent to get rid of that pesky graveyard crawler he has for his will held deck, just cycling through for an infinite. This will do that for you. Polluted Delta. Now I do believe all 3 of my shock lands for my colors. And not shock lands, fetch lands. Now these are helpful because they pay 1 life, and I get any island, swamp, or mountain depending on the 2 colors on there, which can search for things like my Blood Crypt, which is a swamp or a mountain. Because it does not say a basic island or swamp, it just says an island or swamp. So I run all 3 of these to quickly get out any color I need, and these are mainly used to search for my Triome as we get down there, because Triomes are incredibly important with 3-color decks ever since they've released Triomes, and they're just wonderful. Now, Port of Carfel from the D&D set has been great. I didn't originally use these D&D cards because that's just a 6 mana ability. For losing a land, I have to pay essentially 7 mana to use this ability. But the ability itself does work very well with my commander. Because like I said, my commander doesn't need to use mana to get creatures out. So paying 7 mana essentially, 6 mana plus sacrificing this land, I mill 4 cards and then I return any creature from my graveyard to battlefield tapped. Which is great because while my commander can bring back pirates, and this is essentially a typal deck, I don't have only pirates in my graveyard. So having something like Port of Carfel that can bring back other types of cards in a pinch is very helpful. Up next we have Raucous Theater, which is one of the Murders of Karlov Manor lands. Now, once again, this is a swamp mountain land. It's not a basic, but it can still be searched by my fetch lands. And this has the Surveil effect on it. So even though it comes in tapped, Surveil is better than Scrylands for this deck because Surveil can put things into my graveyard. If I don't think I can play it next turn, if I have other plans for my mana and it's a creature that might be helpful, I can put it in my graveyard and cheat it out with Commander and then still do my other plans. So Surveil has been great help in this deck, and adding the Surveil lands was my favorite part of the Mirza Karlov Manor deck. I do run some other cards from there, but these lands have just paid dividends. Now, we also run Restless Reef, and just tapped is not really searchable. It covers my colors, make black or blue, but I can also quickly turn it into a 4/4 land creature, which is good because 4/4 is around where the rest of my deck is, and that's a decently tough creature. It can kill a lot of things, and it can prevent being killed by a lot of things, and it still has Death Touch. So even if they do want to block it with something bigger that can kill it or something safer, they run the risk of losing it to Death Touch regardless. But I do still lose the risk of losing a land. But as long as it attacks, target player mills 4. And as we've been over, that player's me. This deck is all about me. So, anything that lets you mill, good. Anything that lets you mill yourself, better. And Restless Reef attacking as a 4/4 like the rest of my pirates, and milling myself, perfect. Now, Rogue's Pass is an older card from this deck that I never really removed because there's no real reason to remove it. Now, I don't have much that says on dealing damage to an opponent, but I do have a lot of on attack triggers, and I would like to keep those creatures safe while they're attacking, like Restless Reef. That is essentially a 10 mana combo. It's 4 to cast Rogue's Passage ability, 4 to turn Restless Reef into a creature, and then I lose 2 lands tapping, but I can make that Restless Reef protected. So Rogue's Passage is just a solid card. If you can attack and you have attack triggers or combat damage triggers, this is the perfect card for any deck that runs attacking as a game plan. Up next, Scalding Tarn, another fetch land. This one is my red-blue fetch land. We had Polluted Delta as my blue-black. Now we have my red-blue. I should have a red-black in here, and I'll see as we go through the land. I may have removed that just because it was too much fetch lands for not enough, and I took Urborg out of this deck a while ago, so these fetch lands aren't just also swamps. They are only fetch lands. So up next, we have a fetchable land, Smoldering Marsh. It is a swamp mountain, so it is searchable, and it enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, which is why a third of my lands are basics. I didn't remove them entirely because I run all 3 colors of this in my color combinations. Black-red, blue-black, blue-red. And speaking of, the blue-black, Sunken Hollow. It's the Island Swamp version, and if I control 2 more basic lands, it comes in untapped. Skipping past that swamp that we already covered, we're going to go to Takanuma, the Abandoned Mire from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. It's a legendary land. Legend doesn't really matter. It's still a land. It adds black mana. But from my hand, I can pay 3 mana in a black and discard it. And I can mill 3 cards. And then choose any creature or planeswalker from my graveyard and add it to my hand. Now, we've seen the distributions of card types, so we don't have planeswalker in this deck. But once again, hitting any creature as opposed to a specific creature is going to be great. Especially since this ability costs 1 less for each legend creature I control. And as we went over with Mines of Moria, the efficiency to put it out untapped, because I have so many legendary creatures. So Takanuma is just great for a graveyard-based deck like this one. And again, for graveyard-based decks, the Surveil lands. This is the red-blue one, Thundering Falls. It is searchable. It is a little slow with the tapping, but the Surveil helps with the whole game plan of the deck of putting all the cards I can into my graveyard. Next, we have Undercity Sewers, the final of the 3 Surveil lands that came out from Merfolk Karlov Manor. I don't really need to go over this one. We went over 2 others. This is just the blue-black one. Watery Grave is my final shock land. I actually only run 2. I do not run Steam Vents in here, and I do not run the 3rd fetch land. Now you can add those or ignore those, swap any lands out as you like if you want to copy this deck, but this is just the set of lands I liked. And the final one is the Triumph Xander's Lounge. Now, Triumphs have been amazing as just a land type. They come in the battlefield tapped unless you have other ways like Peregrine Dynamo or no, it's Tiller Engine or Amulet of Vigor or Archipelagos. But they're going to come in tapped, but they can provide any of three colors. And if you're running a 3-color wedge deck or a 4-color deck or even a 5-color deck, having access to 3 of those 4 or 5 3 colors is just it's incredible. It is the most necessary land card you need to put in there past basic lands. And not only that, if you're good on land, if you need to just draw something, this land isn't helpful, it has a cycling effect for 3 mana. You pay 3 mana, you get to refresh 1 card in your hand. Everything on this card is super helpful, except for the tapped part, but it has enough effects that it pays dividends. Right. So that was all of the lands. That was the land spread I have, why I have these cards, and how I'm able to cover my colors as long as I can draw them, which is like any deck. If you don't draw it, you don't draw it, and you can't guarantee you'll draw everything unless you're running the 98 land card deck that just wins on turn 1. Alright, moving on, we're going to go to the enchantments. It's the smallest section I have, and it's because they are focused on generally one idea of the deck to make it work faster. So, we're going to start with Fleeting Memories, because I did just say that these all work with the deck idea and how the deck should run. Fleeting Memories is a bit of an outlier to that. This is here to work with another card that does help the deck, and to give that card a little more value. Fleeting Memories can be taken out, can be removed. I am tampering with some other ideas. If you catch my stream on Mondays, we go over Magic the Gathering tool tips, decks, and strategies. And so that's what I will be doing for this deck. Fleeting Memories is the first to go if I do remove anything. So what it does, it is a 3 mana enchantment, 2 colors and a blue. When it enters battlefield, you investigate, which just means you make a clue token. Whenever you sacrifice a clue token for any means, target player mills 3 cards. It isn't a right of 2 mill, it is to put 3 cards on top of his deck into his library. But for me, I just need to have them in the graveyard by any means. Discard, mill, death, whatever. So that's helpful if I can generate clues. But I really don't have much clue generation, which is why this is going to be the first to go. Now, Cemetery Tampering is another great one from Capenna. I loved all the Hideaway cards from Capenna. I loved all the cards from Capenna until Return to Ixalan came back out, Caverns of Ixalan. Capenna was my favorite set. Now, this is another 3 mana enchantment. It has Hideaway 5, which means when it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top 5 cards of your library and choose one to exile face down, and the rest go to the bottom library in random order. Now, all the Hideaway effects, when they trigger, you may cast that exiled card for free at the time of triggering, regardless of spell speed. As I know, as priority. That's what we call in Magic. So the way this Hideaway triggers is at the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill 3 cards. Then if there are 20 more cards in your graveyard, you may play the exile card without paying its mana cost. Which is great for this deck. This deck is just trying to dump cards out as much as possible. But you may play this deck different than I do. You may not want to always be milling those 3, so it is a may effect. You may miss a trigger, and that's fine. You can just claim that you didn't want to, and you didn't really miss a trigger. You didn't miss a must trigger. You're not misplaying and invalidating your turn, even the whole match. And if you look, these are all 3 cost. I don't run much above 3 or 4 cost because I run such small lands. I can get away with this. Well, I get away with such small lands because of the amount of cost. But what I do run that's bigger, if I can hide away that and I can pop that out, that's also wonderful. That's a great way to cheat out bigger cards. And whatever I hide away can't be milled because there are certain cards that are necessary to winning and to the combo pieces in this deck that I can't get back. And we'll go over those as we go through the key pieces and the combos. But Hideaway is a very helpful part of this deck. That part is the more helpful, actually. than the mill, which is interesting as this is a selfish graveyard milling deck. Right, up next, we have Case of Shifting Visage from the Mirza Karlov Manor. Now, these case effects are fun. They're like a new type of saga, kind of. They're closer to class effects from D&D. But instead of paying to level up like you got experience, you have to actually meet criteria to solve the mystery. And once the mystery's solved, you know who done it. So this one needs 2 blue mana and a colorless. 2 blue, any specific pip is always annoying, and the more you have of a specific pip, the harder it is to cast. But this card is worth the hassle of trying to specify mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you surveil 1 card. As we went over with the lands like Raucous Leader, surveil is necessary to this deck. You look at the top card of your library, and you may put it in your graveyard or back on the top of your library. So your upkeep, you can see what you're going to draw or what you like in your deck. You make your decision then. During your end step, you're able to solve cases. And if to solve this one, as long as there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard, you solve it. From then on, as long as this case has been solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, you may copy that spell. And that sounds great, but I did mention I do have a fair amount of legendary creatures in my creature pile. I think it's probably around 9 to 11 out of the 25 creatures, but that does leave me with 14 to 16 non-legendary creatures that I can copy by casting. But like I said, Admiral cheats them out. I don't cast them that often. But when I do, this will double them, which makes it helpful, makes sense for the non-typal pirate cards. Because this is not just a pure typal deck. I do have non-pirate cards that I would prefer to use outside of my graveyard. As weird as it sounds. Up next, standard card, Black Market Connections. I run black Market Connections. Once again, another 3 mana card using 1 black pip. At the beginning of my pre-combat main phase, so after drawing, I can choose 1 or more abilities. But I do have to choose one. It's not a may, it's a must. For 1 life, I can create a treasure token, helping with my mana problems, if I do have mana problems. For 2 life, I can draw a card, helping with my hand size problem, because I do have a hand size problem. And for 3 health, I can create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter token with Changeling, which is considered another pirate. But as far as we've seen, all the pirates we want to use are in the graveyard. So why do I want a pirate on the field? Well, we'll get into that and why Changeling is helpful and important. But this card is super helpful for fixing wherever you are in a game. If you need more land, if you need more hand, if you need more mana, if you just need a better board to protect yourself, health is a resource that you can and should spend. Now, should you dump 38 health in a churn? Probably not, but I do that sometimes. As long as I don't have Black Market Connections on the field, which would then kill me the next turn. So this card is just pretty much a standard card for black at this point. It is wonderful, and it's a little easier to use than normal Black Market. And the final enchantment we run is Arcane Adaptation. Sticking with the 3 mana theme, it's 2 and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, I choose a creature type. All the creatures I control are also the creature type I've chosen. The same is true for creature types I control and creature cards I own that are on the battlefield. So this pretty much makes it so anything that the light touches is a pirate. If it's in my deck, it's a pirate. If it's in my graveyard, it's a pirate. If it's on my field, it's a pirate. What if it already was a pirate? It gets 2 hats. If I borrowed your card, it's a pirate. You see where I'm going with this? This helps Admiral Beckett Brass's typal ability work for my non-typal cards. And 1 card out of 99 isn't consistent. So we're going to move up to the artifact section. So first up, we have Agatha's Soul Cauldron. This expensive legendary artifact for 2 mana and about $50 says that I may spend mana as though it were any color to activate the abilities of creatures I control. Creatures I control with 1/1 counters on them all have activated abilities of all creatures I have exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And its active ability is that it can exile a card from a graveyard. Any graveyard, any card. When a creature card is exiled this way, I put a 1/1 counter on target creature I control. So I'm incentivized to exile a creature from a graveyard with an ability, an activated ability, not a triggered ability, not a static ability, to then put a 1 counter on a creature I control to give it that activated ability. And if that activated ability needs specific mana colors, I can use any mana colors. So this is helpful because I put my own cards in the graveyard. I could put my opponent's cards in the graveyard. My opponent might put in their cards in the graveyard. My opponent might put another opponent's cards in the graveyard. This is a 4-player pod. So Agatha's Soul Cauldron allows for a lot of fun plays and a lot of key plays in this deck, which we'll go over later in the video. Now we have Altar of Dementia. And now I can click these. Altar of Dementia, 2-mana artifact. Once again, another 2-mana artifact. We're keeping these costs low. We only have 32 lands. Altar of Dementia sacrifices a creature that I control, obviously. I can't sacrifice your creatures. If I could, this card would be banned and probably a lot more expensive than $14. When I sacrifice that creature, target player puts a number of cards equal to that creature's power from the top of the library into the graveyard. Now, I could mill you, but I want to mill me. And thanks to Admiral Beckett Brass, a lot of my cards go from whatever low power they were to a 4/4. Now, I am going to exile them if I do this, but I do have Nesting Grounds to deal with that. And I could just not do that. I could exile your stuff if I borrow it, if I have a reason to take it or a way to take it. I could just exile yours. But generally, if I'm going to be hitting myself with the Altar of Dementia, I'm going to go for broke and try to get as many cards as I can and go for a win con or two. After that, we have Arcane Signet. Classic mana rock, 2 mana, makes 1 mana of any color. Super helpful, super necessary. I'm running a 3-color deck. Collector's Vault. Now this one is specifically because I am running a pirate deck, I'm running a graveyard deck, and I like treasure tokens just as a person. So for 2 mana I can play it, and then for another 2 mana I can activate it. I tap it, I then draw a card, and then I choose any card to discard, whatever I want in my graveyard, whatever I don't like in my hand, whatever would be helpful in my graveyard, whatever I just have no use for in this game. Afterwards, I create a treasure token, effectively making it a 1-cost ability. If I use like a Soul Ring or a Temple of the False Gods, I'm not running Temple, but that's just a suggestion if you wanted to run one. I essentially get to shuffle one of those colorless mana into a colored mana and make more artifacts for other win cons or ways to stack a deck. I did bring win cons treasure tokens. I am not running Revel in Riches. This is not as treasure token focused as some of my other pirate decks, but treasure tokens are still a helpful source of mana if I have access to them, which I do. This card works perfectly fine with the deck identity of putting cards in my graveyard. Up next, we'll have Grimoire of the Dead. Now, this is a cards in graveyard card. It is one of the more expensive cards in the deck, mana-wise, at 4 mana, which is where I try to keep the highest, but I do have about 6 or 7 cards above this. It is a legendary artifact, which doesn't really mean much for any of the deck, but it is what it is. I can't have copies of it. For 1 mana, I can tap it and discard a card, putting a card in my graveyard for free, essentially, for 1 mana. And then I put a study counter on Grimoire of the Dead. I can bring that card back with Admiral. I can bring that card back with Takunema. I can bring that card back with a lot of ways. But the important part is getting those 3 counters on it, because I can tap it and remove 3 study counters from it to sacrifice the Grimoire of the Dead, and I put every creature card from every graveyard onto the battlefield under my control, and they are all black zombies in addition to other colors and types. Now, this is great because I want to put a lot of cards in my graveyard, and I can pull them out of my graveyard. But if I do happen to lose some of my win cons that use that effect, I could have transitioned to putting your cards in the graveyard, and then I could put your cards onto my side of the field. And once again, with Arcane Adaptation, your cards, my field, pirates. So Grimoire of the Dead, very helpful, very nice in a graveyard-based deck, especially like mine. Up next, we have Jester's Cap. Now, this card isn't necessary to the deck. It can be replaced. It might be replaced. But this is in here for a specifically hilarious Jester's Cap, annoying combo, but also because I want to be able to look through target opponent's libraries. There's really only 2, and now with Modern Horizons 3 coming out, 3 cards that really ruin my deck, and I run one of them. Bojuka's Bog. If an opponent has Bojuka's Bog, an opponent has Nautiloid Vessel, opponent has the new Bog card coming out, I forget the creature's name, they exile target player's graveyard. And I want to put as much cards in my graveyard as fast as I can, so I am likely going to have most of my deck in my graveyard by the time someone plays Bojuka's Bog. So I want to be able to just look through their deck, know what they have. Information is a resource, and it's a powerful one. And I want to be able to remove Bojuka's Bog and anything that I think might be a combo piece for their commander. But mostly it's to remove Bojuka's Bog. I want to keep my graveyard. I'm very selfish. I'm very greedy. My graveyard, my win. But this can be removed. This is just in here because it's a way to search, and I can recur it, and I can do it again, and I can just keep hitting people over and over and over again after I get rid of all my threats. I can such a cripple a deck. Up next, we have Masculine Nexus. Again, this is like Arcane Adaptation. It costs 4 mana, but none of it's colored, so it's technically a little easier to put out than Arcane Adaptation. Now, what this artifact does is essentially the same thing, but instead of choosing creature type, they're just every creature type. My pirates, our ninjas, our rogues, our warlocks, our goyfs. My pirates are and can be everything. Same for creatures I control that I do not own, and same creatures I own that aren't on the field. But what also is helpful is, again, that Shapeshifter Changeling tokens. It can make more of these. Once per turn, I can spend 3 mana to make a 2/2 Shapeshifter token with Changeling. Making a pirate or anything. As long as Masculine Nexus is on the field, everything is everything. Even if Masculine Nexus is not on the field, my Changelings are still everything. And we'll get to that at the end of this section of artifacts. Up next, we have Soul Ring, just classic mana rock, 1 mana, makes 2 colorless, super helpful. I use this to pay for Collector's Vault and I make a treasure token off of it. I've changed my 2 colorless mana into 1 mana, and I get a card in the graveyard. So we can just move on from Soul Ring. Like, it's a wonderful card, but it is Soul Ring. I don't have anything to say more about that. Sword of Once in the Future. This is one of the newer swords. It's not the newest. That's Sword of Wealth and Power, I do believe. And I do run that in a different deck. But Once in the Future works great for my deck. Like all swords, it's a 3 mana equipment for equipping 2, and it gives 2/2 and protection from 2 specified sources, whether that be colors or instant sorceries. Specifically, this one protects me from blue and black, which is helpful against bounces and removals. But the reason I put this in here is the damage effect. Whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player, I surveil 2, which lets me put up to 2 cards in my graveyard, giving me 2 more graveyard resources to use. And then I may cast an instant sorcery with mana value 2 or less from my graveyard without paying its mana cost, exiling it instead of putting it in my graveyard afterwards. Like I said, I try to keep everything below 4. I do have a good amount of sorceries that are 2 or less, so I can use those again, and I would like to use those again. And this deck recurs creatures mostly, so being able to not recur my sorceries really means that exiling them isn't that big of an issue. And once again, this gives more reason to run my Rogue's Passage. This is probably the only thing I have that says deals combat. I have one other card that says deal combat damage, actually. But I do not run much that says deal combat damage. And so anything I can Rogue's Passage with this, if I'm against a red, white, green deck, I can get this ability off with Rogue's Passage and get free spellcast, free surveils. So that's why I run this sword specifically. I could run more, I could run less. I used to run Hearth and Home, but that's when I had a Flicker pirate deck, which was also a very fun pirate deck. I might make a deck video about that one day. I do not currently run that anymore, but I might want to redo that. Up next, you have Tyrion's Journal from the Caverns of Ixalan. Now, this is one of my few transforming cards. I love transforming cards. It's just super fun. Werewolves were fun because of that, but they were just so tricky to play around the mechanic to transform them. But this one's a lot easier. I can tap it and sacrifice an artifact or creature. I make treasure tokens. I make changeling tokens. I want creatures in my graveyard. And I get to draw a free card. So for putting things in my graveyard, which I like because I use graveyard as a hand, I then get to add another card to my actual hand. So all in all, that's just a fair trade. That's +2 for me. But then for 2 mana, I can tap it and I can discard my entire hand and transform Tyrion's Journal. Now, hitting an entire hand seems rough. I can hit instants, I can hit sorceries, I can hit artifacts, I can hit enchantments, lands, or I can hit a bunch of creatures. Or I could have already had no cards in my hand, which I tend to run into that problem a lot. So having nothing in my hand to discard, having 1 card in my hand to discard, transforming it, super effective. And what it transforms into is that land that gets pushed to 33 lands. This is why I have a third of my deck is lands. it taps for a black mana, or if I tap it, I may cast a creature spell from my graveyard this turn. And if I do cast that creature spell, it doesn't target creature in my graveyard. That creature is what's exiting my graveyard, because I choose to cast it as though it was in my hand. It enters, it's a Fanatic counter on it, and is also a vampire. Now, as we said, we have Nesting Grounds. Fanatic counter doesn't really matter unless, because if you're going to get someone who's going to remove your card with Fanatic counter, they're going to remove a lot of your cards. There's not much you could do about that, so exiling it isn't that bad. You just stop milling yourself so much, and you take your turns. You wait till you have a good opportunity to bring it back, and then win from there without having to worry about what your opponent's going to do. So once again, Fanatic counters, not as big a deal as I originally thought they'd be, and a lot of people thought they'd be. But interestingly is that it makes it a vampire addition to its other types. Now that's going to come into play in about 2 more cards. So let's keep going forward. We'll go to the Grim Captain's Locker. This card is the most expensive card under my enchantments, my artifacts. It's 4 mana, like Masquerade Nexus or Jester's Cap or Grimoire of the Dead, but this one needs specifically a black, making it just a little bit harder to cast. Its first tap effect is that I can surveil 1. Looking top of my library, putting in the graveyard. That's effective. This chest is the bottom of the Briny Deep. That card's going to the bottom of the Briny Deep. And eventually Davy Jones will come and collect its soul, but not before I use the other effect. I can tap it, and each creature card in my graveyard will gain for the turn escape 3 and a black, the cost of this locker. And it has to exile 4 of the cards from my graveyard. Now, escape allows me to utilize that mass resource of cards in my graveyard that I might not be able to recur, I might not want to recur, and quickly summon something. If I just need 1 card out because I have such a small amount of cards in my deck I can win, I'll bring that 1 card out. If I need a combo piece out to make everything else work, I'll grab that and exile what I have to. This has come in handy on so many occasions as, I don't want to say a budget way because it's super expensive to bring a lot of things out, but as a alternative way to utilize Grimoire of the Dead or a Living Death or something like that. But the final artifact, and the reason why the Changeling matters, why Tarian's Journal make things a vampire matters, why Arcane Adaptation matters and Masquerade Nexus matters, is Throne of the Grim Captain, a 2-mana legendary artifact that I can tap it, mill 2 cards. Milling cards, once again, is fantastic. Milling 2 cards is twice as fantastic. And the craft mechanic that came out in Return to Ixalan was super interesting to me, and I wished I could use more of the cards. I tried to, but they didn't fit the identity of the deck I made as well as this one did. Or this one kind of got crammed in there, and I made the identity fit around it. But it does just straight mill 2 cards, which is super helpful. But the craft effect is with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire. Now, Arcane Adaptation makes everything a pirate. Tarian's Journal makes everything a vampire when it comes back. Masquerade Nexus makes everything everything. And Black Market Connections, Masquerade Nexus make a shapeshifter that can be everything. So, craft works by exiling the specified card types, paying a mana, paying the appropriate mana, which is 4 in this case, and those cards can be exiled from either permanents I control or cards in my graveyard. And I put a lot of cards in my graveyard. And what doesn't hit there, Masquerade Nexus, Arcane Adaptation, and the Shapeshift tokens make up for. It returns this card transformed under its owner's control. So I can tap it to mill 2, pay 4 now that I've hopefully hit what I need, exile it, return it transformed face up as a new permanent, so it does have summoning sickness, but it is untapped. And it comes the Grim Captain, a 7/7 legendary skeleton pirate spirit. This thing has a block of text. This thing is the pirate version of Ormenthal, the Profane Prince. It has Menace, it has Trample, it has Lifelink, it has Hexproof. It is a 7/7. It is a threat. And more than that, when it attacks, each opponent would sacrifice a non-land permanent, just because it attacked. Then after that trigger procs, I may put one of the exile creature cards used to craft the Grim Captain onto the battlefield under my control, also attacking, but still tapped. Now, if I do use the tokens with Changeling, I don't get those back. They fizzle after being exiled. If I use other cards that do have those types, or had those types temporarily due to Arcane Adaptation or Mass Nexus, and now no longer have them, it is still the card that was exiled with it. So I can bring that back tapped and attacking. Now, some cards that are big that I would use that for, I don't like using them because they are tapped and attacking. They are not having declared an attack. So I would lose the attack triggers that those cards do have. But still, it cheats them out attacking. It is now another threat. It is a cool card, and that's why I fit it in the deck. I made space because I thought it was super cool. And it was cool for the lore and the identity of my deck. Moving on, we'll go to the instants. Now, these are mostly here to protect me, a little bit here to help me draw and consistently keep my deck going. So really, it protects my plays. It protects my cards. It protects my playing. So first up, we'll go Change of Plans. One of the few X cost spells I have. It's X, 1 and a blue. So if you pay all your mana, it's whatever number you had minus 2. It's an instant speed because it's my protection card. It's one of my biggest ones. It is essentially my blue Teferis. It's a lot more expensive. Each of X target creatures I control will connive. I may have any number of those cards phase out. Now, connive means I draw a card and I discard a card, which puts cards in my graveyard. If it was a non-land card I discarded, that creature gets a 1/1 counter, making him a little bigger. Is it going to be a lot? Probably not. If it's one of the cards that I brought back with Commander as a 4/4, making it a 5/5, it's a little better. But the phase out is that important part. I can potentially make him stronger, then I can phase him out, protecting from a board wipe at instant speed, protecting from a large amount of block attacks happening. It is my main big protection card. Coming up next, we have Consider. This is one that kind of protects my momentum, my plays. Single blue mana instant. I surveil one, and then I get to draw a card. So that's if I get a good thing on top of my library, I get a creature. If I can get an Anger or a Skeleton Crew or something, I can put that in my graveyard, which is a second hand for me in this deck. +1, draw a card, +2. So Consider helps the deck going. It greases the wheels. It protects me from having a dead hand or a dirtle. Up next, we have a very offensive instant. It's Cyclonic Rift. While it is offensive and it does return target non-land permanent your opponent controls to their hand for 2 mana, or returns every non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand for 7, it's still defensive. You use this if you're being swung on, if your opponent is starting to build an infinite or a win con. It protects you so you can still keep playing. Up next is an actual offensive one, Deadly Rollick. Now this one's 4 mana. Like I said, 4 mana is where the heaviest I want to go is. But no one ever pays mana for Deadly Rollick. Like 90 times out of 100, 9 out of 10 times is a simpler fraction. I don't know why I did 90 out of 100. You have your commander out, and you cast this for free without paying its mana cost. It exiles any creature on the field. It exiles your opponent's commander. It exiles your opponent's combo piece. It'll exile anything, and it's going to protect you because they don't have that piece. It's going to hurt them because they don't have that piece. So it's a sword and shield. It protects while it hurts. Up next, we have Demand Answers. This is a draw card. I liked the art from it. That's why I run specifically this one as opposed to a different one, because this one came from Mirza Karlov Manor, and I like the whole magnifying glass looking art. As an additional cost to cast this spell past the 2 mana I need, the 1 in the red, I must sacrifice an artifact, which is my treasure tokens, or I discard a card, which is a card I want in the graveyard anyway. I then get to draw 2 cards. Now there's Faithless Looting, there's Tormenting Voices, which I think I ran before this, but this is instant speed. This also has the artifact effect. If I have treasure tokens I can spend, if I stole an artifact someone, this one has a little more versatility than one of those other ones I was using. Up next, Mana Drain, one of the only counters I'm currently running. I used to run a lot more, but the deck has just kept milling them out, and I wanted to streamline it, go a little faster, a little more aggressive. So I just run Mana Drain now to really feed things like my Change of Plans or my Recall or some of my bigger cost cards. Mana Drain, if you haven't run into this, is one of the most annoying counters you can run into. It'll counter any spell, and at the beginning of your next main phase, the caster's next main phase, they add an amount of colorless waste mana equal to that spell's mana value. So let's say you counter my Grim Captain's Locker. You get 4. And that's 4 mana you can then use to, say, cast a Grimoire of the Dead. Or if you count my Arcane Signet, you only get 2, but I don't get my Mana Rock, which might be the only thing I need giving me colors at that point that I need to have. So Mana Drain, it's a counter, it stops plays, and it then gives you mana back during your turn. During the first phase, you can actively use it. So really effective Mana Drain. One moment. Next we have Mystical Tutor. This is one of the only non-black tutors I run because they have to reveal cards, and they're very limited. But it does let me search for an instant sorcery and reveal it. I can search for my change of plans to protect myself, Cyclonic Rift, Deadly Rollick, Mana Drain. I can search for my other tutors with this. It's super helpful, but it does reveal to your opponent the information that you will draw that next turn. That's also another downside to the mystical tutors, the worldly tutors, the enlightened tutors, that you have to wait a turn. But for another mana, I can then surveil 3. Whatever I put on top of my library, I can put in my graveyard, I can keep it there, put the other 2 down, and then I can flashback it for an additional mana, which means I can surveil 3 again. And the ability to put things in my graveyard, super helpful. Up next, final instant, we have Vampiric Tutor. Now this one, once again, does put on top of my library. I have to wait a turn. It does cost 2 life, but I don't have to reveal what I'm searching for. And once again, like Mystic Tutor, like Vampiric Tutor, these are instant speed, so you can do them at the end step of your opponent's turn, right before cleanup phase, when they can no longer do something that might make you mill or alter what you put on top of your library. So now that we've done our instants, we'll go to our sorceries. First sorcery is Back in Town. This is a new one from the Thunder Junction set. It returns X target outlaw creature cards from my graveyard to the battlefield. This is another X card I run. I just recently put this in here, so I didn't remember I was running it. It's X, 2 mana, and a black. And what it does is it is another, like Grimcast Locker, another alternate way to dump a large amount of my pirates back, because pirates are the main focus of outlaw cards in this deck. So I can return those from a graveyard to the battlefield. Up next, we have Buried Alive. Now, this is a 3 mana Entomb. Entomb works on instant speed, but I do Buried Alive because I want as much as I can, as quick as I can, for the least amount of space in my deck. And I do usually want to do them in 3s because I do have combo pieces that work together in the graveyard that I want to hit at the same time. I want to get them in there so I can have them ready. And I can do 2 or 3 different combos at once with Buried Alive. Cathartic Reunion. Now, this one is a cheap draw on my turn only. I have to discard 2 cards. So I have to have a total of 3 cards in hand to use this at minimum. But it does draw me a whole 3 cards, and I get 2 cards in my graveyard. So this is really just a +5, because this is a graveyard-based deck. Charnel Serenade. This is one of the expensive cards in my deck. 6 whole mana to play it. 2 black, 4 colors. Hard to get. But it has a suspend cost. For 2 colors and a black, making it effectively a 3 mana card, I then would have to wait 3 more turns, as if though I had dropped a land every turn, regardless if I do or not, as if I was playing on curve. I then cast it after those 3 upkeeps. When I do cast it, it surveils 3. And then it returns any creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. After which, I exile Charnel Serenade with 3 time counters on it again, essentially making an infinitely casting sorcery. But it does cast at the end of suspend, meaning that's when you're able to counter it if you want to stop that. Now, the important part is I don't have to put anything in the graveyard with the surveil. I can stack my deck however I like, but I also don't have to bring back a creature card that was put there with the surveil. It can be any creature card, typal or not. So that's why I run such a heavy card for my land distribution, because it's cheaper and I can use less. I can use it multiple times. Now, for one that I can't use multiple times, but I can't do for cheaper, Cut Your Losses. Again, 6 mana. This time it's 2 blue. Is a sorcery that target player mills half their library rounded down. Now, that can be any player, but like I said, I want that to be this player. I want it to be my deck. And I could hit my opponent's deck if I needed to pivot away from my win cons to Grimoire the Deading, my opponent's graveyard. And it has Casualty 2. I can sacrifice a creature with at least 2 power, like my tokens, like any of my creatures I want to bring back as a 4/4, like any creatures that I have brought back as a 4/4. And when I do sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater, I copy this spell. I can hit myself again. I can hit 2 separate opponents. I can hit one opponent twice. It essentially makes someone mill 75% of their deck. And I would like that someone to be me. This is my biggest way to get cards in my graveyard fast. And I have one off this combo. Up next, Demonic Tutor. Like Vampiric Tutor, it searches for anything. It costs 1 more mana, and it's a little slower at sorcery speed, but it adds it directly to my hand. No waiting, no planning. Search it, play it, love it. Feed the Swarm, for the same mana cost at 2. It's my favorite targeted removal in this deck, because it can target creatures or enchantments. And I find enchantments go a lot farther in people's decks towards winning and their deck identity and their game plan than like an artifact does. So this can hit either of those, and I would then lose life equal to that mana value. But life is a resource. If I can remove a key piece, if I can remove Krenko or something, I can remove Fable the Mirror Breaker, I can remove a Black Market or a Braids of Fire that got stacked up, a Leyline of the Void that's hurting my graveyard, that's worth the 4 health. Up next, we have Gamble. Now, gambling is only gambling if there is a chance you can lose. And for 1 mana, I can search my library for a card and put that in my hand and discard a random card at random. Then I shuffle my library. I can't lose. All the cards in my deck, I want in my graveyard. Anything I add, I want specifically that, because I don't have an ability to get that in my graveyard yet. Key search for this is like Anger, or if I have Anger in my hand, go something else. Because maybe I want to keep everything in my hand. Maybe I just want to thin out my deck. Maybe I want you to discard what's in my hand. Maybe I just want to grab an Agatha Soul Cauldron for a combo. You hit a different card, great. That card's in my graveyard, I still win. Gambling's only gambling if you can lose. And with this deck, cards in the graveyard is a win. Speaking of cards in the graveyard, 9 mana, Hingaruk's Wake. I always say multiple colored pips make it harder to cast. For this card, it's that 7 colorless mana. Unless you mana drain something, you're not really getting this. Not consistently, you're not doing anything else. But what it does do is worth that 9 mana. You destroy every creature and every planeswalker you do not control. Anything your opponent's built up on their side of the field that's a creature or planeswalker is just gone, unless it has indestructible or phased out or protection. Actually, no protection. It's a world wipe. This is the safest board wipe because it's one-sided. You win, they lose. And this makes it worth the 9 mana. Incarnation Technique. Now, giving your opponents access to your 2 cards and your cards is not always the best idea, but Incarnation Technique is kind of an exception. It's 5 mana, 1 which is black, and it has the Demonstrate ability, which means that I cast it, you may copy it. If you do, you choose an opponent to also copy it. You can then stack that, because you have priority, you can decide what happens. You can do your copy, you can do their copy, you can do your Incarnation Technique. You can demonstrate for them how the effect's supposed to work. And what that effect is you mill 5 cards, and then return any creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Which is great for me. I can bring back any of my non-typal or my typal cards, and I get 5 more cards in the graveyard. I do it twice, I get 10 cards, 2 of them on my field. Super helpful. My opponent likely isn't running graveyard recursion. He likely isn't running anything that sacrifices and puts something in the graveyard. If he is, he does get 1 card back. But he also probably has ways to get that card back anyway, and he was going to do it regardless of. So, me getting 2 cards back and then maybe getting 1 if they didn't whiff a mill is great. If they did hit a good card they got back, but they have 5 other cards, they probably lost something else they couldn't recur. They're not running graveyard deck. That Demonstrate hinders them more than it helps them. But this one could help them more. This is my preferred board wipe, Living Death. For 5 mana, 2 of which is black, every player will exile all cards from their graveyard. This is why I don't really want to mill them unless I want to mill myself. Then, every player sacrifices all creatures they control. then every card that was exiled with this card's effect is then put onto the battlefield. So if I have most of, if not all, my creatures in my graveyard, you have most of your creatures on your field, we change positions. All my stuff's out, all your stuff's gone. I then have to kind of find a way to get haste back because my main haste is anger being in the graveyard, and this would bring it back. But I'm in a significantly better position because I milled myself. Now, if I lose this card, I don't have a way to get this card back. It gets exiled. I just milled it. And I couldn't touch it anymore. I had to exile for an escape. Then, yeah, I would like to, start milling my opponent more. I don't have to worry about them getting value off the fact that I milled them because I'm Run Living Death. I can just hope for Grimoire of the Dead at that point. Recall. This card is how I recur Living Death and Grimoire of the Dead. It's how I get back the stuff that I lost that I need that I don't really have another way to get back. For 2 X's and a blue, which means I have whatever number I pay for X, I pretty much get half of it. Because if I have 26 mana, I get 13 off X. But I also have to have the resources in hand. So you choose and you discard X cards from your hand to take X target cards from your graveyard and put them in your hand. Then you exile Recall. Likely I only need to hit 1 to 2 cards at a time. So I need 2 cards in my hand aside from Recall. I pay 2 to 4 mana. That's it. Simple, effective. It gets the job done. This card has been instrumental in protecting the deck from losing to its own mechanic. So if you're going to run this, this is kind of a necessary card to keep. Toxic Deluge is another board I have. I preferred with my idea to wipe boards as opposed to prevent you from having them. That's why I run more board wipes than counters. This one uses that resource again, health or life. After you pay the 3 mana, you cast a spell for X life. All creatures get -X to the end of turn, where X is the amount of life you paid. You really need to pay like 7 unless you're going against like a green beatdown deck, then you're probably paying 20. But as long as that 20 wouldn't kill you, you're fine. Up next, we have Vandal Blast. 1 mana to destroy any artifact you don't control. Super helpful. 5 mana to destroy every artifact you don't control. That's hurtful. That will take down a lot of people, and that's why I can run Feed the Swarm, because I have this for the artifacts. So Feed the Swarm can really target those enchantments or creatures. Up next, we have Victimize. Another way to kind of shuffle the cards in my hand, on my field, in my graveyard. I can choose any 2 target creatures in my graveyard, preferably non-typal, because I have other ways to bring back my typal cards. And I sacrifice a bring backable creature or a creature that doesn't have a finale counter or one of my tokens from the field to bring those 2 cards back tapped. I can't really do anything with them, but they are back on. I get their static effects because it's something I didn't really go over with Soul Cauldron. I wasn't going to go over till the combo part of the video, but I do not have many active abilities in this deck. So if you want to change, you can have more active abilities, but this is a triggered ability deck, and we'll get to why in a moment. But first we have Windfall. 3 mana to disrupt everyone's plays. Every player will discard their hand, and then they will draw equal to the greatest number of cards each player discards this way. Now, I've mentioned that I'm likely not going to have cards in my hand. I'm going to discard them, I'm going to mill them, I'm going to play them. I'm probably not going to have many resources in hand. But with this card, I don't need to draw back up to the amount I discarded, which would be 0. I need to draw the amount you discarded, which is like 5 to 7. So Windfall is just a hilarious thing to watch a blue player who's just been drawing go, my plans. And then you're like, yeah, thanks for new plans. It's super fun to watch their face fall. But speaking of fall, let's go over all these cards that I want to fall in my graveyard. As a reminder, we're running Brass Unsinkable. She mills 4 cards, and she brings back a pirate card during combat. So we want typal pirates. What isn't typal either needs to stay in the graveyard or be worth not being able to bring it back from the graveyard as easily. So first up, we'll have Anger. It's not a typal pirate. It's 4 mana. It's a 2/2 with haste. It's not really a strong card to play or to cast or to really do much with. But if I can get into my graveyard and I can control a mountain, which I have the 4 basic mountains, I have the Triome, I have the searchable Swamp Mountains, Island Mountains, my creatures have haste. And that is great for this deck, as I want my creatures to be in the graveyard, and I want them to come out of the graveyard, and I want them to be ready to go. I want them to be coming out swinging. So he is a non-type card that is destined to stay in the graveyard. If I bring it out, that's a problem, but I have ways to put it back. Or I just let you kill it. Up next, we have Breach's Eager Pillager. Now, 3 mana, 3/3. This is my favorite Breaches for this deck because I don't focus on taking things from you as much as I used to, or my other decks do. And what this one does is he has First Strike, which is always a fantastic ability. He's a 3/3, so he can come back strong with Brass. But whenever a pirate I control attacks, I can choose an ability that hasn't been chosen this turn for up to 3 different attacking pirates, or 2 with triggered ability doubler. I choose the ability of creating creature token, a treasure token. I can make something not be able to block me this turn. So if I have menace, you have 2 creatures, you're not blocking. Or I can exile the top card of my own library and I may play it this turn. If it's a land, I can play it. If it's a spell, I can cast it. Play beats cast in a lot of these circumstances, so I can use lands. So that's why this breaches over the one that takes the opponent's cards, because I might not have the mana to use it. Clandestine Meddler is a little out of place here. He's a 3 mana 3/2. He is a vampire though, so he's here mostly for Throne of the Grim Captain. But he does get to suspect one of the creature I control. And a suspected creature gets menace, but cannot block. And while I have Clandestine Meddler on the field, as long as one or more suspected creatures I control attack, I get to surveil one. So every combat, I'm surveilling one, putting more cards in my graveyard, stacking my deck, just trying to help me change the flow of the game. Up next, I have one of my favorite pirate cards that came out, just ever. Coercive Recruiter. For 5 mana, it's a 4/3 Orc Pirate. Whenever Coercive Recruiter or another pirate enters the battlefield under my control, I can gain control of target creature until the end of turn. I untap that creature, and until the end of turn, it gets haste and becomes a pirate in addition to other archetypes. Now, what's the best part about this is it's any creature. I can target itself to give it haste. I can target you to take your thing. If I have a trigger doubler like Panharmonicon, I can target it and another creature to give them both haste, make them both pirates. I can target one of my other creatures to make it a pirate so I can get the Anthem effects if I was running Anthem effects. This card is just my all-time absolute favorite pirate card because of that effect. Up next, we have my second favorite pirate card. Probably third, actually. Dockside Extortionist. This little guy, 2 mana, 1/2. That means that when he comes back as a 4/4. And that is a huge jump from 1/2. But most importantly, he has an ETB effect, creating treasure tokens equal to the amount of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. Now, if I haven't broken those, if I'm playing him early, if I'm playing him late, I'm getting a lot of mana. And then he dies, I bring him back, I'm getting twice as much mana. Dockside Extortionist gets so much value from Brass Unbreakable's effect. Up next, we have Doom Whisperer. Now, this guy's a little expensive. He's 5/5, but he's a 6/6. Nightmare Demon doesn't really do anything for the deck. Flying Trample doesn't really do anything for the deck. But paying 2 life to Surveil 2, that does something. That shuffles my deck, that stacks the top of my deck, that puts cards in my graveyard. That kind of is a big engine to quickly dump resources. And I'd prefer to do that like after a Cut Your Losses or something that gets a lot of cards in my graveyard. Or I use it as a budget version of that to get things in my graveyard. Now, I said health is a resource, but you don't want to spend 38 in a churn. I have spent 38 in a churn. Because that does work with a couple other cards I have going in my deck, and that is a plus 19 to another card I have. But up next we have another card, Emery, Lurker the Lock. 3 mana legendary merfolk wizard. Now I did need a merfolk for Grim Captain, so I have a couple of them. I have a couple vampires. I really only run 1 dinosaur though. So Emery costs 1 less to cast for each artifact I control. I have 12 artifacts, I can make treasure tokens. She can generally cost 1 mana. When she enters, she once again mills 4 cards, which is great. I want more cards in my graveyard. Now, as long as I have cards that sacrifice themselves, like Grimoire of the Dead or Jester's Cap, and they don't exile themselves, Emery allows me to tap her and choose any artifact in my graveyard. I may cast that card this turn. I still have to abide by the card's normal rules and cost, but I can recur artifacts with her. And she's a merfolk, so that's helpful. That's helpful on 2 fronts. She's a 1/2. If I can make her a bigger creature with Magical Nexus or Arcane Adaptation and bring her back as a 4/4, great. If I can't, no worries. Her ability is to be a merfolk and to recur my artifacts. Up next, we have the only dinosaur who's made the cut for this. I could run Nizal the Primal Tide, that discard effect to really exile and protect him, to flicker him. It's helpful, but I don't need him as much as I need, as much as Atali helps for being any dinosaur. Now he's a 6 mana, 6/6, 2 red pips, legendary elder dinosaur. So again, I'm up to like 3 or 4 legendaries. I I have that for my Zamoria. I have that for Takunema. I have that unfortunately against my Shifting Visage. But what Atali does is when he declares an attack, which means if he comes back as the only dinosaur for Throne of the Grim Captain, he doesn't get this effect. But if he just declares an attack, doesn't need to hit, I exile the top card of every player in this pod's library. Then I may cast a number of those spells without paying the mana cost. So if I hit land, that's a whiff. I can't use it. But if I hit anything like my own in Garruk's Wake, my opponent's Cyclonic Rift, I can't pay the overload cost, but I can bounce something that wouldn't be destroyed by Garruk's Wake. If I hit a creature, I can cast that creature. It's on my field, it has summoning sickness, but it's mine now. For free. And he's kind of a leftover from when this was a thief deck. But I didn't need a dinosaur anyway, so he kind of still works. Up next, we have Francisco the Foul Marauder. Now this guy, super fun, super cool, super interesting. 2 mana, 0/1, cannot block, bird pirate. Now, every good captain needs a bird, and Francisco is one of the best. What he does is, when one or more pirates I control do contact to a player, he explores. Now, that means if I'm hitting you with 3 pirates, I explore once. If I'm hitting 3 opponents with 1 pirate, I explore thrice. And what explore does is I look at the top card of my library, or I reveal it, actually. I may then send it to the graveyard, or leave it on top of my library if it is a non-land card. If it is a non-land card, if it's a non-land card, I put a 1/1 counter on them and I can put it in my graveyard and leave it there. If it's a land card, I add it to my hand. Now, that's important for later for a combo I have, because Agatha Soul Cauldron did say that creatures with 1/1 counters do get activate abilities. He puts 1/1 counters on him. Maybe, because it is a gamble. And this is a gamble I can lose. Up next, Hostage Taker. Possibly one of the most splashable pirates that ever came out. This girl goes in any black-blue deck. She's 4 mana, 2/3. Whenever she enters, you exile a creature or artifact until she leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may use mana of any type of spell to cast that. Now, you're going to do that to your opponent's stuff. You're going to take their Soul Ring. You're going to take their Staff of Domination. You're going to take their doubling cube. You're going to do that twice if you can get your Case of Shifting Visage off. You can do it 4 times with Panharmonicon. There's a lot of ways to use this and use this effectively and harshly. And then I can bring her back as a 4/4, doing it again, making her stronger. But a card that's already strong from when he comes in, from when he dies, from when he attacks, Lord Xander the Collector. Probably the heaviest creature I run at 7 mana. I have to run all 3 of my colors Grixis. I have to run 4 mana. He is a legendary, but he is also a vampire, so that helps for some of my other vampire needs. He is a 6/6, and when he enters the battlefield, however he enters the battlefield, maybe through Throne of the Grim Captain, maybe through Admiral Beckett Brass, maybe through Victimize. Maybe I had 7 mana to spend, I just casted him. Target opponent discards half of the cards in their hand, rounded down. Which is great. You have 7 cards, you discard 4. Actually, no, you discard 3. You discard 3, so it's in your favor. Whenever Lord Xander attacks, defending player mills half the library, rounded down. You have 71 cards, you mill 35. Whenever Lord Xander dies, target opponent sacrifices half of their non-land permanents they control, rounded down. And this is a attacking ETB deck. It doesn't really have as much death effects, but I can sacrifice them to my Ultra Dementia. I mill 6, you sacrifice half your permanents, I bring it back. I could run a Machaeus the Unhallowed deck, but I run. This deck actually has a fair amount of non-human creatures, so I could. It used to have a lot more human pirates in there, so that's why I didn't do it. But Lord Xander, heavy as he is, the effects are worth it, and I do need more vampires. Now, Malcolm the Alluring Scoundrel. I used to run Malcolm Kin Navigator in this deck, but the treasure tokens weren't necessary. I moved over to my treasure token deck. This guy is one of my other 2 combat triggers. He is 2 mana, 2/1. He has Flash. He's a legendary pirate. He has Flying. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, I put a chorus counter on him. Afterwards, I then draw a card and I discard a card. I do have to do both these effects. These aren't may, these are must. If there are 4 more course counters on Malcolm, I may cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. So, my big cards, Lord Xander, Atali, cut your losses. Those can be cast for free after I get the triggers. But that's about 4 combats, but he's a rather cheap card. I can get him out effectively. And if I do lose him, I can bring him back as a 4/4 and start stacking those safer because it's harder to block and destroy a 4/4 through combat. Up next, probably my second favorite pirate card, Merchant Raiders. It's a 4 mana 2/4, a little cheaper, a little tougher, a little weaker than Course Recruiter. It's a human pirate, which is why I didn't run Mikaeus Unhollowed. Whenever Merchant Raiders or another pirate creature enters battlefield under my control, I tap up to 1 target creature. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as I control Merchant Raiders. Now, this makes a fun combo with Curse Recruiter. Merchant Raiders tap you down, Curse Recruiter targets it, takes it over to me. It's untapped now. I swing with it. I tap it, use its effect. You get it back. You're now its controller. It's your upstep. It doesn't untap. I untap when I borrow it. It stays tapped when you keep it. It's super fun. Second favorite pirate. Now, next we have another legendary vampire. This is Mirko, Obsessive Theorist from Mirza Karlov Manor. She's 1 blue and a black, 1/3. She has flying and vigilance, which vigilance is always fun, super helpful, keeps you a blocker. And whenever I surveil, I put a 1/1 counter on Mirko. That's why I have the surveil lands. I have my surveil enchantments. I have my surveil instants and sorceries. I have Doom Whisperer to dump 38 health to surveil 19 times. Therefore, putting 19 1/1 counters on her, making her a 20/22. Her effect is, at the beginning of the end step, I return any creature with less power than her from my graveyard to the battlefield Fanatic counter, which is why I want her to get bigger. I want to be able to bring back a Lord Xander or an Atali. But moving on, because this video has gone on for a while, I thought it'd be taking like an hour. It's like 2. We have Olivia the Crimson Bride. She's a vampire. She's a legendary. She is 3/4. She's 6 mana, but she has haste and flying. And the effect of when she attacks, I return any creature from my graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It gains the caveat of when I don't control legendary vampire, I exile this creature. But if I bring back Mirko, if I bring back Lord Xander, they are legendary vampires. If I have Masculine Nexus, or if I brought something back through Tarian's Journal, they are legendary vampires. So they can't leave because they are their own protection for that effect. And if they do die normally, they just die normally. So there's no real downside to running this as one of my graveyard returns. Up next, we have Pirated Copy. We used to have Protean Raider, but Pirated Copy is a lot better. It's a little more expensive, but I don't need the condition of attacking. It enters as a copy of anything and is also a pirate. Protean Raider didn't really do that. And if this creature or the creature I copied, my creature or yours, and attacks, deals count damage to any player, me or you, I get to draw a card. They don't, I do. Nothing but upsides for 5 mana. This is one of my favorite copy cards behind Phyrexian Metamorph. So up next, we run Pitiless Plunderer. Now, I don't sacrifice myself that much unless I really have out the Ultra Dementia. He's 4 mana, 1/4. He can come back as a 4/4. He's a human. He's a pirate. He could be removed, but he's there just to kind of tell people that it may not be worth hurting my board. Because if you blow me up, if you wipe my board, if you just try to target removal things, anything but him dying gives me a treasure token. So I will be able to fund my next plays, maybe different plays, better plays, if you start killing my board. That's why I wouldn't. That's why he's kind of in here. He's kind of here to dissuade my opponents from targeting my board. Because I don't want them to target board. I don't want to target them. I don't want them to target me. I want to play Solitaire. I want to set myself up, and I just want to win in one turn. So up next, we have Port Raiser. Port Raiser is the opposite of that idea. Port Raiser is that I have a lot of creatures, and I want to attack. And if I can get every creature out, I can get Anger back in the graveyard, I can give them all haste. I can then give him Rogue's Passage, because Rogue's Passage is unblockable for the churn. He says, when he deals combat damage to a player, I untap each creature I control, and there's an additional combat phase. So no matter how many combat phases he generates me, he'll be unblockable the whole turn. But he cannot attack a player he has already attacked this turn. Meaning, I can only get 3 combats off him, additional. So for a total of 4 combats. theoretically, if I have my whole board and they're all big, I can kill everyone in one turn. I can also make 6 combats extra, though, because of one of my next couple cards doubling triggered abilities. But so he's kind of here for that combat win. Next we have Ragavan, the most aggressive early game pirate in existence. 1 mana, 2/1 legendary pirate. You can dash him out for an additional mana. And by dashing, he gets haste, and he returns to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Thereby kind of protecting if your opponent was going to like terminate him on turn 2 or something. What his effect is he deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token, and you exile a top card of the player's library. Till the end of turn, you may cast that card. Now, late games, you're just kind of dashing him in and out, you're protecting him, you could probably cast that card. Early game, you're just removing a card from their deck. Hopefully, you're going to hit something good. But regardless, you've exiled a card from their deck, and you got a treasure token for it. Ragavan is just one of the most annoying pirates ever made. Probably above Hostage Taker, but she's probably a little better because she splashes a little more. Up next, we have Roaming Throne. Now, this is what I've been talking about with the triggered doublers. Roaming Throne is a 4-mana 4/4 with Ward 2. When he enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. This is technically a typal deck of pirates, even though I do run the entirety of Ixalan. He is also now considered the chosen type, which would be a pirate, thereby making him applicable to a lot of my pirate effects. If another triggered ability of another creature I control of the chosen type would trigger, my pirates, it triggers an additional time. Now, this is fun for a number of reasons. This makes my Courser Recruiter target Courser Recruiter, and another thing that comes in. This makes my Port Raiser get 2 combat instead of 1 off of each attack. If I have Pirate Copy on the field, this makes 2 additional triggers for everything, including the ward on this new pirate I made. Because he can't trigger himself. But if I have a second one, his ward triggers twice. They have to pay 4 mana to remove it, making it that much stronger. Roaming Throne was super fun for a typal deck, and I'm super glad I did get one. Next, we have Skeleton Crew. Now, this is a 4-mana 3/3 pirate who's also a skeleton. He is my anthem. He is the only one I really run. He gives 1/1 to each other thing that's a skeleton or a pirate. You don't get 2/2 for being both, like the Grim Captain. But my other creatures do get that one little bigger. And whenever a creature card leaves my graveyard for any reason, if one or more of them leave for being exiled for the escape cost, if one or more of them leave for being living deathed or victimized or my commander effect, I make another 2/2 black skeleton pirate, which is essentially a 3/3 of them on the field. If I lose him, if I mill him, I can pay 6 mana to return him from my graveyard to the field tapped. So he has his own recursion ability, he has his own protection. He's where I would use a lot of mana for if I don't need to use mana to then bring another thing out, because I want to get him out to get the abilities out. He does come out tapped, but that's fine. He's there as an anthem. He's essentially an enchantment with a toughness. Up next, we have Staunch Crewmate. This guy is just a nice little, I don't really know what to call that. Not only a tutor. He just gets to look at the top 4 cards of my library to reveal an artifact or a pirate from among them, put in my hand. Put the rest of my bottom of my library in a random order. He just gets to shuffle, gets to peekaboo a little. He just helps me really keep the deck consistent. Doing that twice with Roaming Throne, great. Bringing him back doing another 2 times, great. He's just a little help to be consistent. Now, Thassa's Oracle. We should all know Thassa's Oracle. This is a blue deck. This isn't a large amount of blue pips deck. I don't get the Devotion to Blue ability. I really only have 15 Devotion total. So I have to have 15 or less cards in my deck, which is the plan, to have no cards in the deck. Unshakable Tail is a 2-mana black zombie detective. He's a 3/2. None of that helps with anything in this deck. What does help is that when he enters the battlefield and at the beginning of my upkeep, I surveil one, because surveil is help for the deck. Now, what really he does is when one or more creature cards are put into my graveyard from my library, through surveil, through milling, through putting them in there, I make a clue token. For 2 mana, I can sacrifice a clue token to draw, or I can pay 2 mana to sacrifice a clue token to return him from my graveyard to my hand, thereby kind of giving me a recursion on him, giving me his ETB effect. He is why I have fleeting memories. He is what makes the clue tokens. He is what sacrifices the clue tokens. He is what lets fleeting memories have value. Whether or not I keep fleeting memories in the deck, Unshakable Tail is still here. If I remove Unshakable Tail, I have no reason to keep Fleeting Memories. So if you're getting ideas from this deck, you want to redo it, you're thinking of removing Unshakable Tail, don't keep Fleeting Memories. You don't want Fleeting Memories? Probably keep Unshakable Tail. And finally, Walking Ballista. XX00 artifact construct creature. I have never seen anyone pay for this, even in an infinite mana deck. You pay for 0/0, he enters with 0/1/1 counters and he dies. But he has 2 active abilities to either put a 1/1 counter on him or remove a 1/1 counter to deal damage to a creature or player. So that's the deck list. That is the whole. That is every card we have. That is their effects, why they're in here. But the way that they win through milling, through having my in my graveyard, is a couple ways. So first off, is putting things in my graveyard and bringing them back out. We have back in not back in. We Buried Alive to put Anger in there, put a lot of other key pieces in there, to give me that haste. I then would use something like Living Death or Grimoire of the Dead to bring everything back out. Use Port Razor's combat triggers to swing for game. Go for kills that way. If I do have a big mill of cut your losses, I have been able to just kind of dump most of this in the graveyard, and I bring everything out. I need 15 less cards for Thassa's Oracle. If I can make this also a pirate considered with Arcane Adaptation, I can stack my triggers to kind of use, where'd it go? Roaming Throne first, calling out a pirate, do something like Staunch Crewmate to get a card in my hand twice, Unshakable Tail to Surveil 2, just get 2 cards out, and then Thassa's Oracle will just win me the game off that. And then the final real way I have to win here is Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Now you've seen I really only have, let's check this, 1 card, 2 cards. I don't think I actually have any more. 3 cards, 4 cards. So yeah, I have 4 cards with active abilities. I have Doom Whisper, which is a good active ability to have access to through Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I have Emery Lurker the Lock, which is another good ability to have access to. These don't utilize that 1/1 counter I have on my creature, so I can still keep it going. I have Skeleton Crew's active ability, which is useless because it has to trigger from the graveyard. And while it's in the graveyard, it doesn't have a 1/1 counter. If it doesn't have a 1/1 counter, can't use the ability. So that's not a helpful one. But the most helpful one is Walking Ballista. So you see, the game plan is to bury it alive my Anger, my Ballista, and my Francisco. I play Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I play Admiral Becca Brass. I utilize Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile my Walking Ballista, putting a 1/1 counter on the Francisco I brought back with Admiral Brass Unsinkable's effect. Now, Francisco now gets a 1/1 counter. That's fine and all. He has access to Walking Ballista's abilities. The ability of 4 mana to put a 1/1 counter on him, or 1 mana, or just remove 1 counter to plink a target, creature or player. Now, this is where it gets interesting because if I have the excess mana, I can kind of give myself a little security and put that extra 1/1 on there. But what you really want to do is that remove a 1/1 counter. So Francesco has that ability as long as he has the 1/1 counter. He can remove that counter to deal 1 damage. Whenever any pirate I control deals any kind of damage, combat or otherwise, to a player, he explores. I can plink someone for 1 damage. Then I get to explore and hope I hit a non-land card. If I hit a non-land card, he gets a 1 counter, and then I put that card back on top. I plink, I reveal the same card, and I keep this going infinitely. This is the main sort of infinite and win con I have in this deck to be able to use. I don't run many more. I like to swing as I go. I like to try to build a board. I like to pull from my graveyard, or I like to dump it all in one big churn. But that's pretty much the idea, is to win. You want a Living Death Port Razor. You want a Living Death Thassas. You want to do the infinite Francesco ability. Or hope you pull something big with a Tully and just kind of win there. Lord Xander can also be an effective win con by just kind of burning down their resources. But so, that is this deck in its identity. This is the Ixalan Coalition, utilizing vampires, dinosaurs, merfolk, and pirates all in one big unified coalition to try to win the day and be the strongest plane in existence. Thank you all for joining me on this voyage. Like, comment, subscribe to see more content, and hit that noti bell so you can join me on the next voyage. You can also join the crew at my Twitch in the comments. Hoist your colors high and fly them with pride. Thank you.